Hey, this is Rick Wilson. I am CEO of Miva and author of Dragonproof e-commerce, as well as host of the Dragonproof e-commerce podcast. Although today I have a special guest, my original co-host who has taught me more about podcasting than anyone else I've ever known, Richie Otey, is back with us. And so in one sense, making a podcast is easy. You turn on a microphone, you opine for a few minutes, you press send. Earlier this year, we set out to do, or actually last year, we set out to do a monthly podcast about how to build a sustainable e-commerce business. The idea was we would mainly talk about strategies for dealing with Amazon. And then 2020 stepped in. People will refer to it as history ultimately. But yeah, 2020 stepped in. So everything from COVID to BLM and social unrest. And so since then, I've gotten a crash course in what it means for a person and a business to produce podcast content that matters. And in the era of COVID, the massive protests for social justice, and of course, the Trump administration, it can be damn near impossible to know what to say and how to say it and why to speak at all. So Richie Otey, my co-host and frequent partner in crime, we started the show together. He is also a successful podcast producer and on-air talent with a powerful understanding of why we do what we do. I want to find out how 2020 is shaping the podcast boom and how to get out content that actually makes a positive difference, even if you're selling. I know this is a conversation that'll be interesting to brands who want to do this the right way, as well as continue my own education. So Richie, it's great to have you back, this time as a guest.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you very much, Rick. It's always great to get to communicate with you. As much as you say you've learned from me, I've felt equally. I've learned so much from you, and it's always a pleasure to get to talk to you.
A weird backstory about Rich and I is we met, of all things, 14 years ago via the Dr. Phil show. So, and he has been transformational in my life in many, many ways. So tell me what's going on in your work. Like, you do podcasts for a living at this point. I mean, it's kind of your full-time content marketing job. What's going on?
Yeah. So let's see. It started back actually when my mom died a little over 5 years ago. Yep. And was just sitting there thinking to myself, man, I've kind of played small. I got a lot of things that I feel I could help the world. I feel like there's a lot of things I can learn from other people in the world. And at its base level, even though, I worked in television film for 13 plus years, communication or the story started with audio. And I always had a fascination with video as well. And I still do, and do some video podcasting as well. But it started with just human communication and having a conversation. Because no matter what, whether you were telling a story via audio or telling a story via video, it still was a story, and the words are the things that told that story. So been doing that ever since. Went in, started podcasting, co-hosting on 2 different shows. Actually, it was one show that had 2 separate episodes each week. And then now I'm either producing or co-hosting on 7 different shows now, and about ready to roll out another one. And then, here comes COVID, to your point, and just 2020 and all that's changed. And as much as things have changed, I think more than ever, communication is the most important thing we need to focus on. So I think it's more important than ever in the short answer now, and I'm more dialed into it than ever as well.
I mean, that kind of goes to the first place I wanted to go, right? Which is the last time we had a globally accelerating event was arguably the 2016 election, at least for the US. But if that happens in the US, that happens for the world. In terms of adoption of technology over the last 3.5 years, social media, specifically podcasts, do you think 2020 is going to be a watershed year for podcasts getting the next level of mainstream?
Oh, gosh. There's so many things. Even though it seemed like a quick and easy one that I could answer fast, there's just so many ways I could go with that. Each new time there's a technology or a force from something that's coming from the outside and we have to change what we're doing.
You mean essentially a disruption?
Some form of disruption, right? Whether it's, I won't go down that route, but there's been one industry that's changed every time technology's changed faster than anything. But that's not politically correct on this channel.
We'll avoid that topic, but most people know what's driven the adoption of technology.
So, and it's funny because I haven't really looked into that as an audio form, but I'm sure there's plenty of those out there.
I think they call it ASIM or something now.
But so when there's a disruption,
excuse me, ASMR.
Yeah, there you go. When there's a disruption, there's people who jump into a space, and let's just say, I'll use an example of VHS. So VHS comes into the world. For those of you who aren't old enough, there actually used to be these little tapes that used to put in these computers before you could just push a button on Netflix. And
you ever going to explain to your daughter what an 8-track is?
I still have one. I have a Black Sabbath one.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. I want our audience to hear the answer, but I love those little
yeah, it's all right. I definitely saved them. I have a bunch of Super 8 little cameras and videos too. So she'll explore history. But where I was going is, when there's a new technology, there seems to be a lot of what I would call B-movie content that comes into play in the beginning, because people don't know how to tell a story with the new tech. For instance, television, when television came, it was basically just a radio show that they pointed a camera at.
Yep.
And to some degree, that's a little bit of what's going on right now with some of the people in podcasting, because, everyone's at home. They're not really doing a podcast together with anyone anymore in a studio. And so it's, via Zoom meetings or whatever. Actually, we're doing that now ourselves. It's easy to be in a place where there's going to be a lot of content out there that's being produced, but it doesn't necessarily add a bunch more value. That's going to be
do you think things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever people are using, but Zoom's obviously kind of the dominant one right now. Do you think those things will inspire innovation?
Oh, definitely. Just like many things that happen with Microsoft and or eBay, I know there's a bunch of people sitting in a room where someone's going, how the hell did Skype get left out of this equation? They had a 13-year advantage on all of this stuff. And somehow in a 2-week period, Zoom came in and just crushed them. So someone's sitting there watching Zoom and saying, well, what are the problems? What are the people having issues with now? What are some of the things people could do better? But that's in general, my basic belief in podcasting or any kind of creative outlet is you got to show up and you got to start something. And there's zero chance of you knowing what your finally polished, finished product is going to look like in the very beginning. But it's a balancing act, because you got to have some sort of vision of what you want to take it to. But if you wait till you have it all figured out,
you never get there. I can say this, that definitely, like, doing quarantine and suddenly Zooming once a week on a podcast, I get a lot more practice under the current circumstances because we just crank it out. It seems like everyone has a podcast all of a sudden. Individuals, brands, politicians. This is either going to promote a lot of empathy or a lot of chaos.
Again, I would say that's kind of like money. Is money good or is money evil? It depends on who's wielding the money and what they're doing with it, right? There's going to be, I guarantee you there's podcasts out there that are spreading hate. I don't tune into those, but that's part of the beauty of the world we live in right now is you get to tune into what you want to tune into. It's one of the beauties and the curse, right? We started to talk about this a while back, and I don't want to go down the road too much, but if you only listen, if the algorithms in Facebook or any of the social media only show you what you want to see,
hear,
how are you going to ever hear the other side? And so I think that's really more where I look into it, is as opposed to look into it as, will it be good, or will it be used for good, or will it be used for evil? Is, how do you want to use it? What would you like to do to add to the world? And I think showing up and just knowing if you add value to the world in your own unique way, as long as you learn ways to get people to actually get to hear it, right? Because that's the thing. There's so much noise out there. How do you get to be the signal in the noise? And so it just starts by just showing up and kind of saying your truth, and knowing that there are going to be other people that are probably going to be saying things. I mean, we see it every day. We see people come on, but I think it can be used anyway. I just hope people use it for good.
I mean, wouldn't you say that fundamentally podcasts are sort of a way, I mean, you and I have had this experience personally together, sort of a way to just get in a room or now on a Zoom and like build empathy, right? Like we just kind of explore some stuff, and sometimes it gets deep, sometimes it's shallow, sometimes it's humorous, but like you're ultimately trying to share your life experience with other people, which ultimately allows for empathy. At least that's my guess.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and we're definitely see it with the Black Lives Matter, BLM. It's very interesting to see all the different responses to it. It's not always going to be an easy conversation, right? And I think that's probably the hardest part about all this, is a lot of people, they'll want to start a show and they just want people that only agree with them, or they just want to have, they don't want to really get in any conflict or stand for any one particular thing. They're just trying to be kind of vanilla so they don't piss anyone off. And I think there's a great opportunity here to just, be yourself, but realize that that's all everyone else is trying to do too. And sometimes those conversations can get hard.
They can get very hard. But I think that kind of leads to the next thing I want to discuss, which is I think most brands saw podcasts as like sort of I'm going to get on almost like an infomercial. Here's the ShamWow or whatever. But I actually, I kind of wonder if it's reversed, right? If the e-commerce and specifically the products are really a gateway to content, right? Like, why do I care about this product, or why do I care about you, right? Did podcasts literally flip the whole notion of blogging / content on its head?
That's actually a really good question. I've never really heard it asked like that. But I just think of it as we're living in this kind of soundbite world right now. And if you're going to try to sell something, it starts with attention, right?
Right.
And then so even if you could buy the product before you consume the content, if you don't know of the product, how are you going to do that, right? Unless it's AI or some sort of paid ad. But even then, even if it's just a picture with a little bit of text, that still is content. It's just, what I look at is blogs, video, or a vlog and or podcasting, is just places to be able to show up and talk about what you're about. And so, yes, I guess there are ways to sell the product, and then you like the product so much that you want to learn more about them and consume the content that way. But I still think for the most part, it comes down to, they got to find a way to know about you. That usually comes through some sort of content or social share or an ad or something. And then the more they know about you, the more apt they're considering to buy you. And then the last thing would be the conversion, or actually the decision to buy your product. And to some ways, or to some degree, when you first started the show and we were talking about Amazon, specifically with that being what Dragonproof, protecting yourself from this, entity, that the whole idea was you needed to do things that Amazon couldn't do. Because if it was just the cheapest, fastest thing, what really is your hope of being a brand? And so I think that's where that tie-in comes in with the content you produce lets people know what you care about in the world, what you stand for. And really, even if that's not the only way it can happen, because I agree with you, it could go commerce first. I think that's where you definitely have the opportunity to create a much stickier customer that won't just leave because it's a cheaper price somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good point. Amazon has literally, I mean, for all the things they do very well operationally, they have no brand, no soul. And so that sort of leads me to the next thing, right? So if my job is to represent a brand, in my case, I'm representing Miva maybe. How do I stay true to myself as an individual without offending customers or contradicting my company's DNA?
This is probably the hardest question I get asked. I think that's part of the problem is people are trying to please everybody right now.
Yeah.
But it's also what's unique in what's going on right now is in some way we're finally opening up to, if one person's hurting, we're all hurting. And so it's a very interesting balancing act. And I don't know if there's a one size answer for that one, Rick. I mean, I definitely believe in you needing to stake a flag and really just talk about what you stand for, because imagine if you could, let's take Miva as a for instance. If you tried to tell everybody about just how to start an e-commerce store and the importance of starting an e-commerce store, and you said, here's our phone line and here's our emails, and anybody who has a question about e-commerce and starting a new store, I mean, how easily could you bombard your support department? How easily could you bombard your sales team? I think it's important to niche down and say specifically who you serve. Otherwise, it's hard to have the conversations with the people that you serve best, because other people are getting in the way and you're not really telling the story that they need to hear as well.
So, I mean, my version of that, at least specifically, is that I define Miva, even though we're a company, as a loose collection of individuals, right? But I have strong opinions about both the BLM movement and what's going on right now. And I have chosen to come out publicly in a couple of podcasts and on our town hall and in a few other venues, right? And so as the leader of Miva, I can say that this is what I believe. And so you can have whatever opinion about that you want. You've been the voice of many different shows. I mean, literally you're on, I don't know, 6, 7 shows, as you said. How do you modulate the tone of a podcast to fit the subject? Do you ever get the balance wrong? Do you ever get pushback from the
audience? It's harder when I'm doing more shows in one day, right? Because one of the shows we're on, we have like completely different personalities. We all, and actually I would love to change the format of the show a little bit different. But so we got a Catholic mom with 2 daughters, single parent who loves Trump, and then a Jewish guy who's
I think I know what show you're talking about, but okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like, it really depends on how much time I have in between shows, because I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a different character. I'm always me on each individual show, but trying to remember like, oh yeah, this one is specifically for beginning e-commerce, or this one is specifically, people who have made $10 million a year or more, or exited for $10 million. Like, I'm going to ask totally different questions to those people. And the part that's most important that people forget is, as you're building this community, you want to be asking the questions that listener, and I always, even though you want listeners, I always try to think of it as, you're talking to a person. That's what's unique about it. It's like they usually have you in their headsets. They're walking, they're jogging, they're doing the dishes.
Pre-COVID, they were driving.
Yeah, exactly. Which is an interesting stat we can go into in a little bit more. It's actually consumption's widened, but gone down as far as length of time.
I mean, do you have to bite your tongue, or your real opinions? Does the business have to bite its tongue?
Luckily, luckily I've put myself in a position, and this kind of goes back to your question from earlier about um, how should you stand in it? Should you try to sell, or should you, I've set up who I am and set my personality so strong in the beginnings of each of these shows that the only way you wouldn't know me or wouldn't think I'm, maybe think I'm going back and forth, because you've known me long enough. It depends on what we're talking about and how we're talking about. If you catch me in any moment, I could sound right or left, right? And so I think for the people who have been listening to those shows for a while, I kind of character up in such a way to where they know me. But that in and of itself is one of the problems with podcasting. You don't know when someone's coming into the conversation. It might be episode 157 and they're hearing you for the first time because someone just shared it on social. And
is there anything off limits for a brand to talk about?
I think that comes down to the brand, right? Off limits, no, probably shouldn't, because they're trying to talk to a particular person and they could, it comes back to that. Should you?
I mean, there's a know your audience angle.
Yeah, I mean, it always comes back to that. What are your goals? What are you actually trying to accomplish with the podcast? The format of the podcast is huge too. I know people who do podcasts that they could really care less how many people actually listen to the podcast, because all they're really doing is trying to interview someone, and that person they're interviewing is the person that they want to be their client. I mean, there's so many different kinds of formats that it really kind of comes down, again, what do you want to accomplish with the show? What are you standing for? What type of audience are you trying to create? Are you a SaaS company that's really trying to help people learn the product more so you can cut back on churn? Sure. Are you somebody who believes there's social injustice and you just want to have the ear of the people so you can educate the people, because most people won't go too deep past social to find out real information, and you're trying to be a source of critical information so they can be educated and inspired and do more to lead? Like, there's totally opposite extremes.
Because there's something like 800,000 active podcasts right now, on top of nonstop news, nonstop advertising, social media advertising, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we are literally bombarded in a way that's hard to fathom. And you've said that a podcaster is a curator. Do you mean a curator of opinions?
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's all we're kind of all doing anyway. Like, in my opinion, I'm just curating all the things that have happened in my lifetime and how they've affected me, and then giving my opinion about how I view all those things that have happened. And I feel that's what you do. That's what anybody does, right? They go through. Our bodies are an example of how all the food we've curated and how much we've moved and exercised. Our minds and what we talk about are the thoughts we've curated and what we stand for. So yeah, I definitely believe that.
Do you think podcasts are news or entertainment? Are we journalists? And if so, is there a responsibility to be objective, or is this just the Wild West?
All the above. Am I allowed to say e-ticket ride? Does anyone know that one? It's been a while since
I'm old enough to know what an e-ticket ride is. For those listening who don't know what an e-ticket ride is, although I think most of our audience probably tends to our age group, back in the day, you could actually enter Disneyland for free, and then you would buy tickets like a carnival to go on specific rides, and an e-ticket was the best rides like Space Mountain or Matterhorn.
Yeah. Well, and remember, you'd get them in a bundle at first.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so here's an example of curating and knowing your audience, and reciprocity all in one lesson. And I wasn't even thinking we were going to go this way when I said e-ticket ride, but it's funny. It's perfect analogy. I would take my booklet and walk up to families with kids and say, hey, I know you got a family and they don't really give a lot of A and B tickets in here. So
This is the
here,
rich
take,
guy. This is the rich I know and love.
take,
The guy who's been hustling since 1975.
but there's also like, there's ethical hustling too, right? Like I
I
truly
didn't
went
say it was
at it,
unethical hustling. It's ethical for sure, but that's a great story.
and I would just give them my A&B tickets. And not every time, but almost every time, because they knew their kids weren't tall enough or were going to be scared or whatever, they would give me all their e-tickets to go to the Matterhorn and Space Mountain and
What was the island? Was it Tom Sawyer's Island?
Tom Sawyer's Island. Yeah.
I feel like you'd be the king of Tom Sawyer's Island.
I was, until too many kids just did Tom Sawyer's Island change.
Right, well, let's get back to podcasting for a second. How important is sponsorship to a podcast?
That's actually a really good question too. Comes back down to my answer on why formats matter so much. So if you're an affiliate marketer, and i.e. you're marketing other people, like you're gathering a certain audience. Let's say I'm doing a software podcast and I'm talking about all kinds of different software that could transform your business. In that particular case, the sponsorship would probably come in the form of an affiliate. Maybe someone's trying to build their own audience because they're a financial services guy or something like that. And they're teaching people all the different ways you can, like let's say a Dave Ramsey or something like that. In his case, he probably would never put sponsors. And actually I've listened to a few. I don't think he ever does. I think all his sponsorships are his own products. And so it's like, hey, sponsored by blah, blah, blah. I can't remember the name of his company, but something that's actually his company. And so in general, sponsorships are very important in a way that you got to pay for something eventually, unless it's just a hobby for you. Right. But again, like the social injustice person, that person, they might just care so much about getting that message out there that sponsorship might not be as important. However, if they want to advertise and get that podcast known even more, then maybe they would align themselves with someone like a Nike or someone who's really trying to, standing up with Kaepernick and all that early on. I think they kind of put their stake in the ground. So someone like that might be great because then that could help them pay for it. But it's not necessary if you have your own product or services to sell.
I mean, speaking of that, do you do social media or CPC campaigns for podcasts? Are you obsessed with metrics? How do you judge success?
I do all the above. I'm not super obsessed with metrics. They are important, but again, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're just really obsessed with the art form itself, I don't think metrics matter as much. And you could actually really get good and really put some high quality stuff out over time. But again, in that case, you're going to be funding your own self. But I'm not really obsessed with metrics unless I'm doing something specifically with a company that is driving CPC or
Sure.
or some sort of paid advertising campaign, because there are ways. I mean, man, there's amazing ways to make that happen. I'm helped another SaaS company that they were getting going, and their biggest thing was they were wanting to stop churn. And so put the podcast together, and we'd actually brought on people who used the software itself, taught them ways to use the software even better. We would drive them specifically, instead of driving them to Apple or Stitcher or any of these other platforms, which in some cases it is a good thing to do. in this particular case, we were driving them back to their URL /podcast. So we could then track those people, remarket to those people, and really got to the place where we saw churn. I wouldn't say disappear, because there's always churn.
Sure.
But it dramatically slowed down churn. And in addition, when we could take snippets of those podcasts and creatively title them and actually be able to bring in new people to the platform that would have a universal pop-up if they had never been on the site before at all. And it would say, hey, you looking to get into this particular subject, and, give us your email here. And so we actually got new client acquisition too. And it led to them. I wouldn't say by any means it was the only thing, but it was a big part of them getting a lot of new customers, and they got some pretty good funding that came into them not too long after too, after about a year and a half of doing it.
So, here's the thing, like, thanks to COVID, last time I was in a studio was with you specifically. And that was in early March. And so we haven't seen the inside of a studio since early March. Production value is hit or miss from home podcasts, which is literally everybody now. And so thanks to Amazon, microphones can be hard to get a hold of. Internet connections can be janky. How does that stuff affect how people judge podcasts in the age of COVID?
I think it's a great time for people to start one right now, because there's a bit of a get out of jail free card. Just like I was kind of referring to with the VHS and the B movie stuff. In the very beginning, there's going to be a lot of something because it's new and a bunch of people are jumping in to try it, but the cream always rises to the top. We have an opportunity right now to not look perfect, to not sound perfect. I think if someone really has something to say and they just don't have a lot of money to dedicate to it, or a lot of tech to dedicate to it, right, you could start with your phone right now. And I think you can get away with it for a while. Phone being audio and or video podcast. But as time goes on and people, let's just say the world opens back up, just like anything, they want a better version of that. You were mentioning earlier, what'd you say, 800,000 podcasts. But there's like 600, 700 million blogs there. Actually, I think there's close to 1 billion blogs right now. But how many of those do you actually check into, right?
So sort of speaking on the subject, like, sometimes putting out a podcast feels risky, right? Like, I have no control how people will hear it, at least for me. How do you avoid the gotchas of cancel culture?
That's just leaning into you being yourself. And this right here. Okay. So this is an example what I mean. I don't remember if we actually talked about it on it, but I think it's going to take tough conversations and sometimes long conversations. So this is one that's kind of hard to just have a short soundbite answer to. Cancel culture in and of itself, in my opinion, is kind of scary in that, something could have been taken out of context. They might have just heard something you said for the first time, and next thing you know, there people are saying, ban, never go to that restaurant. This guy said this on this particular time, and it's like, he might have came there 15 minutes after something happened and said something that someone just had it on video, right? So, and is there such a thing as a second chance anymore? Like, do we even believe in growing and learning? And these are the tougher ones for me to answer, because I don't think you can answer it real quick. I think it takes time.
So I have two more questions for you before we wrap for the day. Do businesses have the power to positively impact society with the content they put out? Is it important for that to be the main goal? And can that coexist with sales goals? That was one question.
I would say yes across the board.
And then finally, do you have any advice for me?
Gosh, I think my best advice for you is probably just more of what I said from the very beginning. Your view of people and just how much you really want to see people succeed both in life and in their business. I think just leaning into being more of who you are and voicing as I see you grow on this podcast, I mean, this answer right here is exactly what I would say about any. Is it perfect? Is the sound quality exactly right? Are we in the studio and the booms are fit? No, but you're voicing you and you're standing up for other people, voicing what they believe in. And you even mentioned that with Miva, that it's a collective unit of a bunch of other people. But when you do that, you're giving others permission to do the same. So I would just say more of the same, brother.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much, Rich, for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate being on the show.
I look forward to many more great conversations with you, both in public and in private, as we always do. And for those listening, thank you for listening to the Dragonproof podcast. You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms. And as I'm routinely reminded, please leave us a review.